Hello, welcome to Remember the Film, the podcast where I told your secretary to pack Mr. Pibb. It's the only kind of Coke I like. My name is Josh Bradley, and I am joined, as always, by my co-host, Jeff Grizz Ulrich. How are you, Jeff?
I'm doing great, Josh. Excellent choice for the top of the show quote.
And we're also joined by our other co-host, Hugo Panay. How are you, Hugo?
Meat.
I'm so disappointed. First of all, that's a great intro choice for you, Hugo, but I was also hoping to hear your American accent. I feel like this movie is so ripe for Hugo's American accent.
Oh, no, I can't do, like, the southern... I would not feel... I don't know how...
Neither can most of the actors in this movie.
That's true. Well,
I'm pretty sure most of the actors in the movie are actually Canadians. That kind of tracks. They do these cartoonish southern accents.
I feel like Nathan Fillion pulls it off, though, right?
Nathan Fillion does okay, but I think I'm just thinking of him as his character from Firefly, who also talks with that same accent.
And he's also the same kind of character. A bit goofy, a bit bro-y. I don't know.
His accent's also kind of... His accent's a little less than some of the other people in this movie.
It's not as pronounced.
Yeah.
The mayor in particular is the funniest.
Also, I didn't know this till I read the Wikipedia page. This is supposed to take place in South Carolina. Did they ever give any indication that this is in South Carolina? Besides,
not that I noticed.
Yeah,
no.
I don't know. I would have kind of figured further south than South Carolina.
I would have guessed Alabama.
Alabama, sir. But yeah, so the movie that we're talking about with the funny cartoonish southern accents is Slither from 2006, written and directed by James Gunn. And the reason we're talking about it is because the aforementioned James Gunn has a movie coming out next week called The Suicide Squad. And so we thought it'd be fun to set our sights on his directorial debut from 2006, Slither. And so because I chose Slither this week because of James Gunn, I want to talk very briefly about James Gunn before we get into the movie itself. You guys, your history with James Gunn, when did he first come on your radar? I assume it was Guardians of the Galaxy.
It was, yeah.
No, in fact,
really.
He was, in terms of movies, yeah, probably Guardians of the Galaxy was probably the first one of his I'd seen. But he came on my radar when he worked on a video game called Lollipop Chainsaw, which came out while I was working at GameStop, and so I had to tell people about this ridiculous game where a cheerleader carrying around the decapitated head of her boyfriend kills, zombies and monsters and things.
When was that?
It was shortly after Slither, so 2012. I want to say 2011, something like that.
That sounds about right. Yeah. Hugo, what about you? Guardians of the Galaxy? Nothing before that?
Yeah, it was Guardians. I had heard about him. I had heard about Super and Movie 43, but I hadn't seen those. So it was Guardians that introduced me to him.
I have not seen his segment of Movie 43, and I'm sure he is happy about that, because I don't think anybody who made a segment of Movie 43 wants it to be seen.
No.
Yeah, so you haven't seen Super, though? Super is a movie from 2010. Super is a movie from 2010, which I think is interesting that, it stars Rainn Wilson at a time... There's a very specific time in the late 2000s when they tried to make Rainn Wilson a movie star and capitalize on The Office, and it didn't really work out. And I feel like Super is a good example of how it didn't really work out. It made, $500,000 at the box office, despite, starring Kevin Bacon, Rainn Wilson, and, Elliot Page, and,
Liv Tyler.
Liv Tyler, yeah. I finally saw that, 5 or 6 years ago, and, I'd been putting it off, and when I finally watched it, I'm like, damn, there's, a lot of people in this, considering no one saw it, and no one's really heard of it.
It looked like a poor man's Kick-Ass.
It basically, I haven't seen Kick-Ass, but basically is a poor man's Kick-Ass, from what I understand Kick-Ass is like. Maybe a little... I don't know, Kick-Ass is pretty violent, right? Because Super is
super violent.
Yeah. Part of the whole the whole joke of Super is that it's a ridiculous person, a ridiculous costume, but then he actually beats the crap out of people with a wrench, and it's really graphic actually. And the disconnect is part of the joke, I guess. But I guess I guess James Gunn's pitch had to be really good for Guardians of the Galaxy. I know that's how he got the job, is he just had a good take, and Marvel thought it was interesting and gave him the job for that reason. Because no disrespect to the guy, but I feel like nothing from his filmography would suggest that he could be given the keys to a obscure sci-fi hero franchise. But worked out really well for everyone involved.
Yeah, the Guardians were something that weren't that popular even among hardcore Marvel fans, right?
Right.
Grizz, you might know about this more, but it wasn't like the most well-known comic in the Marvel Universe, even among people who really care about that stuff.
Certainly in terms of where the MCU was at that time, like,
Yeah.
Guardians of the Galaxy are a known quantity in Marvel Comics, but, like, they're like the 5th most popular hero team.
Yeah.
Or lower.
And he really must have had, like, a genius pitch, because he really made, like, it's everybody's, like, the average person's favorite Marvel movie is probably either Winter Soldier, Guardians of the Galaxy, or one of the Avengers. So it's impressive that he was able to make something so unique as well within that Marvel franchise, where, a lot of those movies can feel a bit samey, and his idea for it is so unique and distinguishes itself. Yeah.
I was about to say that like, I think a cynical way to look at the Marvel movies is they can be a bit samey, but I think that the Guardians movies kind of stand out quite a bit.
Did you know James Gunn wrote the Scooby-Doo screenplay for this?
Oh, I'm going to get to that. I'm going to get to that right now, actually. So if you guys will allow me to monologue for like 5 minutes, please jump in whenever you like, because I don't want to monologue for 5 minutes, but I have a long yarn to unspool here for you. I mentioned in the podcast last week that James Gunn and I went to the same high school, which is why he's kind of been on my radar for a long time. Not at the same time. We went to the same high school, but, like, decades apart. But actually, brief anecdote. For many years, his IMDb said he was born in 1970. But I know because, like, all of the senior pictures from the last, like, 100 years are all in, like, this wing of our high school. So I knew he graduated in 1984 because his senior pictures there's a picture of him with a glorious mullet from the class of 1984. So, like, he was definitely not born in 1970 if he's graduating high school in 1984. But since he's gotten more famous because of the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, his Wikipedia now says 1966. So I'm assuming someone at some point was trying to make him a little younger, which I don't begrudge him that. That's a very common thing in the industry. But I thought that was funny that I'm like, I know you were not born in 70 because I've seen your mullet high school picture. So he and I went to the same high school. And he actually came and, like, talked to our film class in 2007 about Slither, which I thought was really, really cool of him. I can give some anecdotes about the movie from that conversation later. But even though we went to the same high school, my history with him actually goes beyond that, earlier than that, because in the 2000s, he was married to Jenna Fisher, who was Pam on The Office. That's what most people don't know her from. And when I was in middle school, Hugo, that's like ages 11 to 14, basically. Yeah. For the non-American listeners. When I was in middle school, I had a teacher named Ann Fisher, and that was Jenna Fisher's mom. So Jenna Fisher's mom was my history and religion teacher in 7th and 8th grade. And this was before The Office. So at the time, Jenna was like a struggling actress in Los Angeles and married to a blossoming screenwriter because at the time, James Gunn had just written the Scooby-Doo movie and the Scooby-Doo 2 movie and the Dawn of the Dead movie. So, like, he was, like, getting, like, starting to, like, really pop off in the screenwriting world. And, like, that was the most interesting happening in Jenna Fisher's life, was her husband was getting all the screenwriting work. So, like, I heard about it a lot from her mom, who was my teacher. What do you got, Hugo?
Was his brother at this time more famous than him? Sean Gunn,
he was
just for being on Gilmore Girls.
Yeah.
I remember.
I never watched Gilmore Girls, but
I remember when I watched Guardians for the first time, and I recognized this guy crackling. Oh yeah, I used to see him on Gilmore Girls because I used to watch it with my mom when I was a kid. I was like, oh yeah, that's cool. I wonder what he's doing in this movie. And then I found out that he was the director's brother, which I thought was fun. So at the time, I guess he would have been a little more famous.
I would think so.
Certainly in terms of like notoriety among viewers, because most people don't internalize who the writer of the movie is.
Exactly.
It's just the hardcore movie fans that get into that.
Yeah.
Like Josh.
Yeah. And also, fun fact, Hugo is Sean Gunn he's the stand-in for Rocket Raccoon and all the Guardians.
Yeah, I know
movies.
that.
So, like,
I did know that. So funny.
He's the guy in the green suit that he's like acting off of Chris Pratt and everything. So, like, whenever they're like talking to Rocket, they're actually talking to Sean Gunn, which I think is cool.
There's the behind-the-scene picture of Batista just stroking his head, and it's just him sitting there in this green suit. It's amazing.
I mean, that's like an important role. Like, that's an important part of the movie that, everyone who's interacting with Rocket needs some kind of like something emotionally to bounce off of. So Sean has to like really bring it like that. So good for Sean Gunn. So my point is, like, my history with James Gunn goes back to 2002 because that's when I was first hearing about him and the Scooby-Doo movies. And actually, fun fact is he's the first screenwriter to have two different movies be #1 at the box office in consecutive weeks, because he had Dawn of the Dead and Scooby-Doo 2 Monsters Unleashed. Have we seen the Scooby-Doo movies?
I have.
I have seen the first one. I remember I went to see it in theaters with my dad. So
Yeah.
And he hated it, of course.
Mm-hmm.
Let's face
Grizz?
it. But I was like 8, so it was
I
fun.
liked the first Scooby-Doo.
Sure.
I hated Monsters Unleashed. It was so bad.
Not a big Scrappy-Doo fan?
No, I am a big Scrappy-Doo fan, and
so that's why you hated
screwed up
Monsters
Scrappy-Doo.
I went to a Q&A with James Gunn at the St. Louis Film Festival in 2007, the same night that he came to our high school. And he said at that Q&A that the Scooby-Doo movies were financially fulfilling, but not creatively fulfilling for him. So, good for you for getting that bag, James Gunn, but no one's going to point to... We're not going to have a Scooby-Doo Monsters Unleashed film to remember anytime soon, I don't think.
Probably not.
How about I have not seen Dawn of the Dead, but what a time capsule of directed by Zack Snyder, written by James Gunn. Who knew that 18 years later those two men would be such powerhouses of popular culture moving forward, given how much control they have over really important properties at the moment. So
I certainly wouldn't have predicted it.
No, nor would I.
In fact, it's definitely weird.
I mean, Dawn of the Dead, for me, that version of Dawn of the Dead is only significant because it's playing in the background of 40-Year-Old Virgin. So that's like my biggest cultural reference point to it.
No, and for me, it's because like the studio bought the rights to Shaun of the Dead from the UK, but agreed to release it only if it released close to Dawn of the Dead, because they wanted to have both the funny and the serious take on the zombie movie genre, I guess.
Yes.
So that's why I know of it, but I haven't actually seen it.
So, good segue, the zombie movie genre. Let's talk about some Slither boilerplate, because Slither is a zombie movie, right? Yeah, it's a zombie movie.
Yeah,
yeah, for sure. In the same way that Resident Evil video games are zombie video games. They're not. Sure. It's technically a virus, but
yeah, but it's zombies. Yeah,
but it's zombies.
So, I think I was listening to the part of the DVD commentary for Slither, and I think James Gunn said that after like Dawn of the Dead took off and Scooby-Doo 2 at least made money.
Made.
Right. I mean, it was a hit, I think.
Yeah,
really
it did well at the box office.
Well, yeah, I just said it was #1 at one point, so. So after those movies came out, I think he he just had like an idea for this, wrote it, showed it to his agents took it out, and like it was, well received around town, and Golden Circle Films said, we'll give you control to you can direct this yourself. He'd never directed anything before. This is his directorial debut, but like they liked the script and like gave him enough free creative control that he could direct, and that was like what he was looking for. It was released March 31st, 2006, budget $15 million, and it made $12.8 million at the box office. That's split between $7.8 million domestic and $5 million international. So pretty bad box office flop.
Yeah.
Again, I think I read that with marketing, it cost about $30 million, and again, only made 12.8.
When I read those numbers, I was a little surprised because, like, as I said before, when Lollipop Chainsaw was coming out, and I was working at GameStop, on GameStop TV, which was the in-store television that played on loop all day. I heard James Gunn be interviewed probably 1,000 times, and it was the same interview every time. And I distinctly remember them introducing James Gunn as, indie horror hit director James Gunn.
Well, I mean, I hear it did better on the DVD market. I don't really
pretty much had to,
numbers
right?
to support that. Yeah, I think it had to. But also, it's fair to call him a hit indie horror director because, before he made Slither, he did like work with Lloyd Kaufman in Trauma movies, which are like schlocky B-picture things.
Yeah.
Like he had his first screenplay credit is called Romeo and Juliet, which is a Trauma movie, and actually in Slither, the character Brenda is watching The Toxic Avenger, which is a Lloyd Kaufman Trauma movie. So I guess like in that world, yeah, he's like an indie horror film maker,
Extremely
but
indie.
At the time, it just felt like an
Extremely.
exaggeration to me to call it.
Yeah, but they're also trying to hype up a video game, so of course they're gonna hype it up as much as they can. But so yeah, like this is a pretty bad box office flop. It debuted at number 8, which is rough.
Wow.
And it only ran for 4 weeks. Like there's only box office data for 4 weeks, and then it was out of theaters immediately. I read that the Universal distributed the movie, and when it debuted at number 8, a spokesperson for Universal put out a public statement emphasizing that Universal was only the distributor, and they only distributed it because they had like a agreement in place with Golden Circle, who is the production company, and like if they didn't have that agreement in place, they would not have distributed Slither. So they were like basically apologizing for it and distancing themselves from it immediately, which tough beat for our guy.
Yeah, well,
James Gunn.
And that's so weird to me because I feel like most horror movies, like they're rarely at the top of the box office except around Halloween, right? But they usually come in and they do. They're in the picture, right? Like, every horror movie is in the frame for release.
I feel like that this movie came out in sort of a moment in time where horror was kind of lost. There was a lot of sequels to classic franchises that were not good, that either failed or made money at the box office, but everybody agreed that these are not good, and original horror movies weren't really being made and were successful. And then in the 2010s, there was sort of a revival of the original horror movie because they figured out a way to make them really cheap and put them out in a moment. A lot of B horror movies now come out in the early months of the year because there's nothing else to watch. And so horror fans are going to go see this $10 million movie, and it'll make 30 million, so that's a success. Even though they're never these massive box office hits, or at least rarely. But they have figured out a way to market these for a specific audience. And I feel like at the time it was like, oh, Jason 15, and
Well, at this time actually, I think like Saw was getting really big. And,
Yeah.
I think Hostel came out probably the same year, I want to say, and like the hardcore like torture porn stuff was kind of becoming like a big thing, and this certainly is not that.
And this is kind of a throwback movie. I wrote
Very
in my
much so.
letterboxd review. It feels really nostalgic of the classic B horror movie.
Horror movies, yeah.
Yeah. So it just wasn't the right time for it. I feel like if this came out today, it would be a Blumhouse movie, and it might make money.
Well, I think they would make this for less than 15 million now.
Yeah.
Because Blumhouse movies are usually 5 or less typically. Yeah. But I mean, I don't know. The effect shots probably cost a lot. Those worms, like every shot with the worms, has to be an effect shot, and that costs money, I guess. But Hugo, I think you're onto something that like this is hard to market to like get this, get the point across what this is. And actually, I think at the time people kind of blamed the fact that it was like a kind of comedy, like a horror comedy kind of, and like I read that some people at the time were saying that like it's kind of got to be one or the other, otherwise audiences don't know what they're getting, don't know what to expect, you don't know how to sell it. That kind of stuff, and that was one of the explanations of why this didn't do well, which is why I wanted to ask you guys. Oh, first of all, I want to talk about horror comedies, but before I do that, I want to look at the box office from 2006, just 'cause this is always fun for me. Look at what opened the weekend of March 31st in 2006. Number 1 of the box office that week was Ice Age: The Meltdown, which was the second movie in the Ice Age franchise. Do you guys know how many movies are in the Ice Age franchise?
I think they're up to 6, right?
5,
the
6.
fifth one's coming out next year.
One, okay.
So they're up to 4 at the moment.
Right.
I'm a big fan of the first one.
I
I've
like
not
the first
seen...
one. I've seen several of the other ones because I was trying to complete the top 100 grossing movies of all time list, and there are several Ice Age movies on there.
Is Ice Age Collision Course or Continental Drift on there?
I believe one of those is for sure.
Okay.
They kind of blur together.
Yes. I honestly, like, I saw Ice Age: The Meltdown. I kind of assumed that was like the third one, but I guess that's only the second one. Number 2 at the box office was Inside Man. Inside Man rules. Have you guys seen Inside Man?
Hell yeah.
Nope.
Spike Lee.
It's so good.
That one with Clive Owen.
Spike Lee, Clive Owen, Denzel Washington. Bank heist movie. Honestly, like top 5 heist movies for me.
Wow.
It's an awesome movie. Yeah.
Yes.
And the music
number 3
in that?
Yeah, very good, very good.
Yeah.
Number 3 is a movie I haven't heard of called ATL. I think it's like an Atlanta movie, I guess. Number 4, Failure to Launch in its 4th week was way ahead of Slither, so tough beat. Number 5, Third Week, V for Vendetta. Great movie. Yeah, number 6, horror movie called Stay Alive. Number 7, shout out to She's the Man in its third week, holding strong at number 7, beating out Slither by a nose. And then Slither coming in, number 8, with $3.8 million, just edging out the fourth week of The Shaggy Dog. And also edging out Basic Instinct 2, which I didn't even know existed.
Was that a Shaggy Dog remake?
Yeah. Oh,
Okay.
actually, no. I'm not sure, actually. Was there an original Shaggy Dog from a long time ago?
There was the Tim Allen Shaggy Dog.
This is that.
This is that? My timeline
This is
is
a Tim
way
Allen
off
Shaggy
on
Dog.
this. That was Tim Allen?
Yeah.
In 2006?
Yeah, in its fourth week. So
Oh,
it came out in
Tim.
February, or early March. Yeah, early March of 2006. Yeah. So that was the competition that Slither was up against.
Hugo,
They
if you're
could
not familiar with
crack
that movie,
number 8.
Tim Allen turns into a Shaggy Dog.
Correct, yes.
One of those.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's one of those.
One of those
Those are
movies
going
where
around,
Tim
yeah.
Allen turns into something else.
When Tim Allen was a extremely bankable movie star. I guess that was the tail end of when Tim Allen was
the
an
tail
extremely
end for
bankable
him.
movie star. That's why he's a
but
dog and not he's Tim Allen.
It's that era of the movie star-driven comedy that doesn't make any sense, and it's like, oh, this guy's in it, I'll go watch that, and they made money.
Well, if you remember, even as recently as like 4 years ago, there's a movie called 9 Lives where Kevin Spacey voiced a cat. So they're
Right,
still making
yeah.
those, I guess.
Yeah,
Ill-advisedly.
they're not as successful though, are they? Anymore.
Yes, it's been a minute since those were successful.
Yeah.
So horror comedies,
Yes.
like I said a couple minutes ago, Slither, part of its box office was blamed on the fact that it was a horror comedy and not like one or the other. And like, I want to ask you guys, like Grizz, I think you said in your letterboxd review that this wasn't like funny enough to even be called a
Yeah.
comedy.
I didn't think this was funny enough to be a comedy. In fact,
So this is just a
a horror movie for me.
not a comedy.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, like, because horror movies frequently do have some comedy, because you always have some wisecracking character who's being sarcastic about their situation, right? That's a very common thing.
always,
It's,
but
it's common
recently,
enough.
yeah.
Well, certainly recently. but
Definitely in the B horror, I think,
Yeah.
genre. Like slasher movies, those types of movies often have, not always, but they often have some comedic elements to them.
So for this one, there were several people who make smart aleck remarks, or the mayor is entirely sarcasm.
yeah,
So
Greg Henry.
yeah, so I could see why it could be billed as a comedy, but I just didn't think the jokes didn't come across as like, haha, this is a joke. It always came across as, we're in a horrible situation, and this is how I deflect horrible situations.
Kind of cutting the tension a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where the comedy is coming in. Yeah. In fact, I think actually, we'll get to this, but like one of my favorite scenes, I think one of the funniest scenes is like when they're in the car, Elizabeth Banks, Nathan Fillion, Greg Henry the mayor, and Kylie the girl, and like they just seen a bunch of really messed up stuff, and like that's where like the Mr. Pibb scene happens, and like the discussing what a Martian is and that kind of stuff, and like that's one of the funniest scenes, and like the mention of Nathan Fillion's mom's toilet, that kind of stuff, like, but that's all coming after like a 20-minute long sequence of like set piece after set piece after set piece that's really horrific, and like that scene is there to cut the tension that they just built up for the last 20 minutes, and that's why there's like a ton of comedy there, which that's kind of how the comedy functions, I guess. Hugo, where are you at on Slither? Is it a horror movie or a comedy or both?
I feel like for me, even the horror was pretty comedic. It's like the way it does body horror is so absurd that I found it funny. And I think because this is made in the 2000s, and the way that it's using the body horror is such a throwback to movies of the 70s and 80s and David Cronenberg and that kind of stuff, it feels like it's so self-aware of that it's making it more absurd than it would have been back then. Like the scene with the woman who's ballooned into this giant thing, and she's like, "Oh, I'm sorry you didn't get it. I'm so hungry." To me, I was cracking up at that. I didn't find it scary. I thought it was hilarious. It's incredibly gross.
That's my thing.
in a
I
really
didn't
funny
find
way
it
for
scary.
me.
I also didn't find it funny. I just thought it was gross.
Yeah, I was
seems
grossed out,
very gross.
but in a really, I don't know, fun way. I thought it was really funny.
Yeah.
I think all the body horror stuff for me was, I think it was made in a way that was supposed to be funny. Then whether that lands with you or not is another question. But I do think the intention was for it to be so absurd that it is pretty funny.
So, as we're talking about this, there was a conversation that was in the DVD commentary. It's Nathan Fillion and James Gunn, and during that commentary, Nathan Fillion recalls a conversation he had with James Gunn in the process of making this, because like Nathan Fillion as an actor like wasn't sure what tone he should be going for, and apparently James Gunn said to him, "We're making a funny movie, but we're not making a comedy." So that's, I think, the line they're walking. Like in James Gunn's mind, he was making a horror movie that happened to also be funny. So I guess that's more what Grizz was talking about. But like, I don't know. I kind of see it as but like that's kind of why I was hesitant to call it a comedy when we were talking about it last week on the podcast. Like I think one of you called it a horror comedy, and I said, hold on, like because I remember showing this to some friends in college, and like afterwards they were kind of mad at me because they're like, I thought it'd be funnier, so it was a horror comedy. And I'm like, well, man, it is funny. It's just it's it's not like Shaun of the Dead. I think Shaun of the Dead.
And that's the problem is when you start talking about horror comedies, there are movies that are so clearly comedies with horror dressing or horror elements to it that they're basically they're not in the same ballpark.
Yes.
I feel like this is more in the lane of the first Evil Dead movie, where it's a horror movie, but you can tell that certain elements have been exaggerated to be funny. And it doesn't always 100% come across whether it wants to be scary or funny. But I do think the idea is there for it to be funny. And with Evil Dead, it's weird because Evil Dead 2 is kind of a sequel, kind of a remake of the first one, and is much more clearly a comedy than the first one is.
That's what I wanted to say, sure.
I do think this is definitely more in the lane of the first one, but I find the first one pretty funny as well. So it's, I think it depends on the way it hits with you. And but it is interesting that he, the director, is saying that his intention was not to make a comedy. So I guess that does matter.
And I usually make this disclaimer when we talk about horror movies, but like I'm not a horror movie fan, so take everything I say about horror movies with a grain of salt because it's not my bag,
Yeah. Well, I wanted to ask you guys about your favorite horror comedies, and like I also kind of want to like really dissect like is it a horror movie or is it a comedy? Like for my list of horror comedies, I have Scream. I fucking love Scream, but like. That's, I think, more in the Slither vein in the fact that it's like it's a horror movie. It's horrific. It's scary, and like it's a horror movie first and foremost. But it's also like got a lot of jokes. It's self-aware. It's deconstructionist. So like it's kind of like
it's playing with the tropes
slapstick as well.
Yeah, it is.
There's slapstick but like in it as well.
It's kind of like poking fun at horror movies themselves, and therefore getting comedy from that. But it is also a horror movie. So I think Scream is more a horror movie than a horror comedy.
Yeah.
I also have Tucker and Dale vs. Evil. I don't know if you guys have seen that, but I think that's also more of a great movie. But I also think that's more of a comedy with a horror movie dressing, like you said, Grizz, Shaun of the Dead, more so than a horror. It's not really a horror movie, but it's also playing with horror tropes in like a really clever way that I like a lot. Actually, all three of these movies that I have listed here are like deconstructionist in their own way. Because my third movie is Cabin in the Woods, which is completely taking apart the horror movie genre, but like again, kind of doing it in a funny way. I think that's of the three between Scream, Tucker and Dale vs. Evil, and Cabin in the Woods. That's really the only one I'd really say that is a horror comedy because it
strikes
both.
The balance very well.
Yeah. Probably skewing horror more than comedy, just based on how it ends.
It does skew more horror, but
yeah.
Every time you cut back to The Office, it's pure comedy. It's like I don't know.
Well, it gets pretty horrific in The Office too. No spoilers for Cabin in the Woods.
No, it does, but the way it's played is so absurd that I think it is comedic.
If you haven't seen Cabin in the Woods, don't read anything about it. Just please go watch it. It's so good.
But if you haven't watched a bunch of horror movies, I suggest you watch several horror movies before watching Cabin in the Woods.
I mean, I'm like you. I don't like horror movies either, so I just kind of went into it without knowing.
I just think you have to have some foundation of the tropes of
some
horror
appreciation of
how
those movies work.
Yeah, so that's why you got to watch a few horror movies before you dive into that one. Same with Scream, for that matter. To fully appreciate it, you need to have seen some other horror movies. My list, Zombieland, which is very clearly a comedy.
Amazing. Yes. That's also a comedy with horror movie dressing for sure.
Shaun of the Dead.
Yep.
And then This Is the End, which is so it's so skews to the comedy side that all the horror elements are also hilarious.
I mean, I saw that on a list. I Googled best horror comedies before this podcast, and I saw that on a list, and I was very surprised to see that because I'd never once remotely considered that a horror movie.
Yeah, well, I mean,
yeah, no, it's more like a disaster movie, I guess.
I mean, it's the apocalypse, but there's devil.
I mean, someone's
stuff.
raped by a demon, I guess. So
like, there's some horror stuff to it, right? And then the last one, and I wasn't sure if this counted because it's hard for me to think of it as a horror movie at all. But Young Frankenstein.
If that's a horror movie, then like a Scary Movie is a horror movie. So I say no.
Yeah.
It's not. Yeah,
but like, I do think as you say, the dressing of a horror movie, the aesthetic of a horror movie, does kind of make a movie a horror movie because like horror isn't necessarily just about the scares. It's about a vibe, an aesthetic.
Yeah, the beats,
style.
the story beats. Yeah,
yeah, and I don't know. That's Young Frankenstein is the classic gothic horror novel adapted into a comedy. So I do agree it's a comedy.
Well, yeah, obviously. Yeah, that's why I wasn't unsure on that one because it's only horror in the way that it is a Frankenstein story, and honestly, if you go back and watch Frankenstein, the super old movie, it's hard for me to even picture that as really a horror movie anymore because it's just it doesn't have the scare factor.
Yeah. So when I was in my first home class in high school, I had not yet seen Young Frankenstein, but in that class we did watch Bride of Frankenstein, and there's a scene where my film teacher had to pause the movie and say, anyone who's seen Young Frankenstein, please hold in your laughter. Then he played the movie, and it was the scene where Frankenstein goes to the cabin and meets the blind old man who gives him like a cigar and gives him beer or whatever. And like, if you've seen Young Frankenstein, that scene with Gene Hackman is one of the funniest scenes in the movie, and like it's pulled directly from Bride of Frankenstein. So if you've seen Young Frankenstein, you're gonna laugh your ass off, even though the Bride of Frankenstein scene's not funny. But it was funny hearing like all my classmates like snickering under their breath because it's good stuff. Hugo, your favorite horror comedies?
So I feel like the example of horror comedy is Evil Dead 2. I think that's very clearly a horror movie and very clearly a comedy at the same time. And I don't know that anyone else is such split 50-50 in my mind. But I do think like Shaun of the Dead, it has horrific elements. It has some scares, even though quite a few. And it obviously is mostly
really.
A comedy.
I don't think there's any horrific elements in Shaun of the Dead.
No, but
there's the jump scare moments.
The gore stuff. Like there's that one scene where he gets pulled apart completely. And of course it's played for comedy, but it
okay.
And then I have some others like movies like The World's End, which again, similar to This Is the End. The World's End is space invasion movie. It plays with Invasion of the Body Snatchers. So is it horror? But it's also, again, mostly a comedy, action comedy, you could say, because that's the cool fight scenes and whatever. I have Scream as well that I thought about. And then there's two more, which again, I don't know. What about Attack the Block? Have you seen this movie?
I haven't
seen it, but I know it's an alien movie.
Yeah, it's an alien invasion movie, but it's also pretty funny. It's I think John Boyega's. Well, I don't know if it's his first movie. I don't know if it's his first movie, but it's definitely the movie where he gained some popularity before Star Wars.
When he was announced for Star Wars, in all the articles, it was John Boyega (parentheses) Attack the Block.
Yeah, Attack the Block.
That was his hallmark.
Very, very fun British. I would say sci-fi, more sci-fi comedy than horror comedy, but it does have some horror, like space invasion elements. And then what about Beetlejuice? Does that count? Like all of Tim Burton's movies, like Tim Burton's movies have a very horror aesthetic and style, but none of them are really horror movies.
Beetlejuice scared me as a child.
I haven't seen Sleepy Hollow, but is Sleepy Hollow kind of a horror movie?
I'm not sure, but like I feel like he plays with the aesthetic a lot without making straight horror, and I feel that's why I'm saying I don't know. Does it looking like a horror movie just on an aesthetic level make it kind of a horror movie or not? Like, is a Hotel Frankenstein, is that kind of a horror movie, even though it's an animated
Hotel Transylvania?
Hotel Transylvania.
Hotel Transylvania. Yeah, sorry.
Okay. Hotel Frankenstein.
Hotel Frankenstein. Yeah, I made that up. Hotel Transylvania. Because it has the aesthetic of horror. Is that a kind of a horror movie in the animation
I say
genre?
no.
Right.
I say no.
Okay.
Personally, I mean, but based on our list, like, it sounds like we're kind of divided on, like, you know, the aesthetic. Some of us, among the three of us, count the aesthetic more.
I think there's a line. I don't know where that line is.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't really either.
Because, like, I put these on my list, but I don't think of The World's End as a horror movie, and I don't really think of Attack the Block as a horror movie, and I don't really think of Scream as a comedy. But, you know, then if you go by the exact definition, what is a horror comedy? There's very few of them.
Well, that's what I'm trying to talk about. Yeah, like I don't really know. I mean, looking at the movies we just discussed, we have Scream, Tucker Dale vs. Evil, Cabin in the Woods, Zombieland, Shaun of the Dead, This Is the End, Young Frankenstein, The World's End, Evil Dead 2, Beetlejuice, and Attack the Block. Of those, I would say Cabin in the Woods is a bona fide horror comedy. Mm-hmm. And the other ones, I think, are definitely one more than the other. And I wouldn't really like fight to call them like horror comedies necessarily. As much
Evil
as they're
Dead
all
2?
great movies.
With the chainsaw.
Okay, Evil Dead 2. Yeah, Evil Dead 2.
Like...
I've only seen that one once. It was a long time ago. But like I've seen Cabin in the Woods a lot because I really enjoy Cabin in the Woods and Scream.
Sure. That makes sense.
Should we move into the Slither plot summary?
Yes.
I think this will be quick. I think Slither's a pretty straightforward movie. Not a ton to say about it. Famous last words. Not a ton to say about it. I may have a lot to say about it. So I really enjoyed the opening scene. I think it's like a good microcosm of like what the movie is doing. If you remember, the opening scene is first shot's an asteroid flying towards Earth, and it intercuts between this asteroid and Nathan Fillion as Bill Party and his deputy Wally sitting in their cop car, bored, just on patrol, where Nathan Fillion's trying to sleep. And it's like kind of cutting back and forth between like this pending asteroid that's getting closer and closer and faster, and this, you know, boring conversation, this podunk town. And it is, you know, implying by intercutting between the two that like it's about to, you know, land and create this big explosion or whatever, and then it just kind of like lands fecklessly in the background behind the two of them, and just with a little plop. And I think that's like, it's setting you up for one thing, and then it does something else, and it's like kind of, you know, playing with your expectations about like what you've seen in using tropes like a asteroid hurling towards Earth, and then like, you know, doing something different and getting a joke out of that, getting a joke out of a trope. And I think that's like a good microcosm for what the movie is doing as a whole. Grizz, do you have something?
Oh no, I was just going to say I paid attention to the opening shot because I was like, Josh always talks about the opening shots, and so I was really paying attention to it. And the first thing that I thought was, asteroids don't make sound as they're hurtling through space.
They do in movies. And also, like, if it gets to the atmosphere, it might make a sound, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, once it enters the atmosphere, sure. But like, that was my first thought, it was going... I was like, this is bullcrap.
I also think that opening conversation between Wally and Bill Party is pretty funny, where Wally's just like trying to use his radar gun on a whippoorwill to see how fast it's flying. Yeah. I think that's funny.
And he's like, he's trying to guess. Oh, usually I can tell for like within 2 miles an hour, but this time I got it wrong.
Yeah.
And he just looks at them in a weird face. I love Nathan Fillion's face. The way he animates is hilarious in anything.
Great face acting. In fact, in the third act, he's got a facial expression, or really a lack of facial expression in the third act. That's like one of my favorite like reactions to anything in a movie. But hold on. So after that, we get like the intro to this small town. Hugo, you mentioned this movie's a throwback to a lot of like classic stuff. There's like a lot of Easter eggs referencing classic horror movies. For example, in these first shots of the small town, there is R.J. McCready's funeral home is on like the awning, and that's a reference to
from The Thing.
Kurt Russell's character in The Thing. Yeah. And I think there's like more hidden Easter eggs like that, but I just didn't make note of them because I don't know all of the Easter eggs. But then we meet Elizabeth Banks, who plays Starla Grant, who's a teacher. And I like that she's teaching survival of the fittest. I like, it's on the nose, metaphor for what's going to happen in the movie. But, I like that. Elizabeth Banks wasn't really very big before this. So, like seeing her. I'm a big fan of Elizabeth Banks, but I don't think she'd done much.
I like her a lot. She's one of those actors who just, I don't know, has looked the same for 20 years.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I just think that's something that I always notice with her. Whenever she pops out in a movie and she's like, oh, yeah, she looks the same as she did 15 years ago. That's awesome.
James Gunn said he was looking for like a Hitchcock blonde type, and he said that Elizabeth Banks was like the one person he found who had the exact look he was going for. And,
yeah, I can really see that.
She's always an actress that when I see her movie, I recognize her immediately, obviously. But it's also like, oh my god, Elizabeth Banks in this, because she's never almost never the top billed person in a lot of her movies. So when I see her just before this, she had been in the 40-Year-Old Virgin, which was not a big part, but it was a highly memorable part.
Yes,
from that movie, and I feel like that's how she always is in these movies. Is she's always very memorable in the
scene
small.
Stealer, yeah,
she's a scene stealer for sure.
Every time she's in a movie, I'm like, oh wait, is that Elizabeth Banks? Or is that Rachel McAdams? That's my reaction.
Oh really?
Every time.
Oh no, they're definitely very separate in my mind.
I know.
Respect to both of them.
I really like them both, but every time I see them, I'm like, oh. Fuck, who's this one again? I'm forgetting.
To your point, Grizz, that she's usually like a supporting character. Is this like her biggest starring role? I'm trying to think. I mean, she was like the romantic interest in like Invincible.
She was also in Zack and Miri Make a Porno. She's one of the leads.
That's a good one. That's a couple years later. So that's probably bigger than this. She's probably more of a.
But yeah, she's almost always a supporting character.
Yeah, good call. Then we meet Nathan Fillion, or we already met Nathan Fillion, but we see him more in earnest, watching Starlet from a distance. He also hadn't been in much before this, Nathan Fillion. I know he'd been in Serenity and had been in Firefly, but other than that, I don't think he had one scene in Saving Private Ryan. But he was not really like a leading man, with the exception of Firefly and Serenity, which is,
also,
beloved but underseen.
Even now, Nathan Fillion, I would say not a big movie star. He's mostly famous for a lot of television that he did. Like I feel like he's mostly famous for Serenity and Firefly, and he did Castle after that.
Yeah,
one of those TV shows that
he's on a TV show called The Rookie right now, where he plays an LAPD officer.
I feel like he's worked in television a lot, but he's not one of those actors. Oh, he's been in 20 movies that
People are also fiercely loyal to Nathan Fillion, though. Like he has diehard fans.
Him. Yeah.
I was just gonna say is like the fan base he has is pretty ardent. So even if he's not like widely known, he is beloved still. Which
is why he's always going to get steady work, because his fans are always going to turn out for him.
Yeah. I know Joss Whedon is a bit of a pariah nowadays, but have you guys seen Dr. Horrible Sing Along blog?
I haven't. I borrowed it from a friend yesterday though to watch this week, because I told him we watched Slither, and he's like, "Well, now you got to watch Dr. Horrible."
Yeah. Joss Whedon aside, big fan of Dr. Horrible's sing-along blog. Big fan. Apparently Nathan Fillion was the last guy cast in this, which is crazy because he's like the leading man. He's like the hero. So like the last piece of the puzzle, they cast the whole movie and didn't have him yet, and then they cast him like 2 weeks before they started filming, which is kind of crazy to me. Other things about this opening, there's a director cameo. After Starla's lesson about survival of the fittest, she's shown outside talking to a fellow teacher, and that is James Gunn. And then Michael Rooker, who plays Grant, Starla's wife, Elizabeth Banks' husband. He comes and pulls her away from her conversation with James Gunn because he's a very jealous husband. And that's our first intro to the great Michael Rooker, who I think most people now know as Yondu. That was actually so thrilling for me watching Guardians of the Galaxy, because there's like a lot of people from Slither in Guardians of the Galaxy, most notably Michael Rooker as Yondu, but also Greg Henry, who plays the mayor in this, plays Peter Quill's grandfather in the opening scene of the first Guardians of the Galaxy movie.
And Nathan Fillion is a CGI character as well in the prison.
Yes. And
they're both, Nathan Fillion and Michael Rooker are both in the new Suicide Squad movie as well.
They are, yes. So, James Gunn is finding work for his pals as he makes bigger and bigger movies. I did mention this earlier, but I want to say that, even though Slither made $12 million at the box office, was a big failure, and Super made like $500,000 at the box office, was a big failure, James Gunn's doing okay because he's written and directed 2 movies that have collectively made $1.6 billion at the worldwide box office. So he'll be all right. He's gonna.
And I feel like the next one will make $1 billion by itself.
Well, I mean, Suicide Squad is coming out next week. I think it's going to be big. But Guardians of the Galaxy 3, I agree, will be an enormous
Suicide Squad is still coming out in a moment where a lot of the world is, not necessarily going to cinemas as much. So,
yes.
I know that the box office has been pretty decent lately in the US, but everywhere else, hasn't really.
And Suicide Squad is also having to combat people's expectations of the last Suicide Squad movie, which was not great. So,
I didn't see it. Did we see Suicide Squad?
I saw Suicide Squad. Yes.
Okay. Not great.
No, it's not
new
great.
one?
No, I haven't seen
the old one.
The old one.
Oh yeah, no, the old one is terrible.
Academy Award winning movie, Suicide Squad.
Academy Award winning Suicide Squad. Yeah.
But anyway.
So again, we meet Nathan Fillion, we meet Elizabeth Banks, we meet Michael Rooker. Michael Rooker, according to James Gunn, is like the MVP of this movie because wearing all that prosthetic that he has to wear in this was like very uncomfortable. He had to wear it for 12 hours at a time. It was very cold, it was very heavy, and like he was in a lot of pain, but he just kind of powered through it because he's a pro, and that's probably why James Gunn continues to work with him because he's great. Apparently, apparently the nicest guy in the world. Like everyone loves Michael Rooker. Very distinct look, very distinct voice.
Yeah.
Like I love Michael Rooker's voice. I haven't seen Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, which kind of like what made Michael Rooker famous. Have we seen Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer?
I have not.
It's from the 80s. Apparently a very disturbing movie, but that's what Michael Rooker is mostly known for.
I also I appreciate that his voice he's not doing like an affectation to his voice. This is just how Michael Rooker talks, and it's
that scratchy voice he's got.
Very iconic sound.
Yes, Mary Poppins, y'all. That's what I hear Michael Rooker saying in my head when I think of his voice. Also, Greg Henry, like I mentioned, he plays the mayor, the foul-mouthed mayor, who, as we mentioned earlier, is comic relief a lot. Everything he says is a funny quip, but he again shows up in Guardians of the Galaxy. In the opening scene, I think he probably has the first line of Guardians of the Galaxy as he tells Peter to come see his mom at the cold open. So, plot-wise, like, the first real thing that happens is Grant, great name, Michael Rooker's character gets turned down by Starla for sex, so he, like, goes out to a bar, meets a girl who had a crush on him when they were kids, they go to the woods and, like, kiss, kind of, or whatever, make out a bit, but he says, no, I can't, because I gotta come to my wife, and then they encounter the asteroid that we saw, crash to Earth in the opening scene, and it, shoots a pin, basically, little needle thing, into Michael Rooker's chest, and it crawls up into his brain, and now he is a alien life form, basically, in a
puppet.
Grant suit. Yeah, exactly, a puppet.
He's like mind controlled, but also at the same time retains his personality somewhat.
Yeah, this isn't really like explicitly stated in the movie, but James Gunn said that like at that moment, Grant is dead, and like the alien is in control, but it still has like some like access to his personality and memories and that kind of thing. Because he does pass for a while, like, talk to people around town that know him and that kind of thing.
And also throughout the movie, even as he becomes more and more monstrous, he still cares about Starla.
Yeah, it's clear that the host memories are, part of the alien. So now when, like, if, let's say, this alien had taken over all of Earth, and then moved on to another planet, then, the next thing that the next time it injects one of those needles into someone, now it's going to get all of that guy's memories.
Yeah. But also, I mean, not only does the alien Grant creature care about Starla because it has access to Grant's memories, also because Starla, like, sleeps with him after he becomes the alien, basically. The next morning, she wakes up, feels bad that she turned him down for sex the previous night, and says, I don't want to be cold to you. So she plays Every Woman in the World, that song, and then they, do their thing. And that alien creature has never felt love before, so having that experience for the first time kind of changes him and makes him love Starla, I guess, and is intending to spare her. Yeah, but at the end, as he's killing everyone and absorbing everyone in the town, he's kind of setting Starla aside to live with him instead of absorbing and killing her and absorbing her. Anyway, so next big scene, I guess, is something called Deer Cheer, which is not something I'd ever heard of before this movie. I mean, I grew up in Missouri, but I'm a city boy. I did not grow up in the rural part of Missouri, but apparently
I'm sure there's a small town that has a deer-themed festival of some sort, right?
I guarantee, yeah.
Plenty.
But the gist of this scene is apparently when deer season begins in this town in South Carolina, they have what's called deer cheer, where they ring in deer season with like a hoedown and live music and get drunk and celebrate the fact that they can go start shooting deer. So good for them. I also think it's a good joke, a good plant where Nathan Fillion's character says like, I don't see what the appeal is of shooting a cute little deer in the face, and then later on in the movie he has to fight a demon deer in the police station.
I feel like, sorry, we skipped it, but I feel like the moment where he starts to go around town buying meat, I think is really humorous, because like he walks into this, I don't know, butcher, or he's in the supermarket in the butcher area or whatever, and he's like, yeah, give me 6. You know what? Give me 14. And you're like, oh, wow, that's a lot of meat. And then he walks into his truck and he has a truck full of meat, raw meat. Yep. I think that escalation of the joke is really good.
Also, just the way...
everything he does, like the way he animates while being this weird mind-controlled creature, but still human, I think is really funny.
Well, plus, you did the quote earlier, Hugo, but when he walks up to the counter and he looks at it, he just goes, meat.
It's a good joke because earlier, like I don't know, a couple minutes earlier, we see him like going through his fridge and taking out all the meat in his fridge and saying meat, and then it's a shot of Michael Rooker looking extremely happy and like giggling to himself, and then it's the reverse shot to like the butcher's table and how much meat there is, and you're seeing what he's looking at, what he's laughing at, and that's when he just goes meat. Like this This is a good reverse shot reveal.
And then the other characters that are mind controlled later do say it a lot as well. They meet, and it's never not funny for me.
Yeah, kind of creepy later on though.
It is, but it's still funny.
Yeah. Okay. Real quick about the horror comedy aspect is like another thing James Gunn said on the commentary track is like he thinks that horror movies nowadays are too focused on like the boo moment, on like the scare itself, and like not enough horror movies are focused on like creepiness.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what he was going for in this. It's just like the entire time, instead of like waiting for a scare, just the entire time there's like this underlying feeling of creepiness the entire time. And I mean, I think he's got a point. I think that holds here. This movie is really creepy. So simultaneously happening during Deer Cheer, Elizabeth Banks is there at Deer Cheer. Nathan Fillion clearly has a big crush on her and is like flirting with her there. But Grant, Michael Rooker's character, is off with Brenda, the woman who had a crush on him when they were kids. And James Gunn refers to this scene as mind rape, which I think is accurate given like the visual signifier. So Grant, the alien, has these 2 tentacles that come out of his chest. They pierce Brenda in the stomach and then pump her full of what we later learn to be worm entities that will come in. It's a pretty... I mean, it's
gross.
Grizz, what do you got?
Well, I just wanted to say that like... This was probably the first time I laughed out loud, was when the tentacles come out. They look like sausages. They just...
Yes. Well, one anecdote I learned when James Gunn came and talked to our film class is he originally wanted only one sausage, but the studio thought that was far too phallic and far too on the nose for the visual signifiers in this scene, for example. And so they made it 2 sausages. That, you know, it's very phallic, like you're implying, and...
I meant they literally looked like sausages.
Well, I mean, sausages also look like penises in some contexts. But the faces Michael Rooker's making during the scene, the faces that Brenda's making during the scene, it is very clearly a, you know, again, it's a rape scene. You know, and it's interestingly
very uncomfortable.
Interestingly intercut. Yeah, it's very uncomfortable, but it's also intercut with Greg Henry, the mayor character, like making the speech about hunting. And then he says, "Let the hunt begin," as Michael Rooker starts pumping Brenda full of worms. They're connecting those 2 ideas.
I think it's what the movie does throughout. It's like it's absolutely terrifying if you think about it, but it's also played as in this weird idiosyncratic way. So you're not sure if you're supposed to laugh or be scared or disturbed by it, which I think is really, really well done. But I also understand how that can make a movie difficult to sell and difficult to absorb for just a general audience, because it is true that if you think about it as rape, it's gross and absolutely disturbing, but it's also kind of funny in the way that it's shot, so you're not sure how you're supposed to feel about it.
Yeah. So after that, Brenda, I guess, disappears. Grant puts her locks her in a barn and feeds her a bunch
Yeah.
of raw meat, which is really gross. After she gets impregnated with his worm, she becomes incredibly hungry, as one of you alluded earlier, and so she cannot stop eating raw meat and dead dogs and possums, I guess.
Everything.
Great line read from Michael Rooker. Brought you some munchies. Love his voice. And like the cops are investigating Brenda's disappearance. Grant was last seen with her, so they like are talking to Starla about it. Blah 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 blah. Stuff happens. Then like Grant comes to, or Starla like discovers dead animals in her basement, which is a really gross scene. One of the few jump scares in the movie also technically is when the dead dog like falls on her
out,
basically.
yeah.
And then Grant shows up at the house and he's like kind of deformed. He claims to have gotten a bug bite. That's like the hole in his chest, but he's like super deformed and everything and horrific. And he kind of like, she kind of like attacks him. He attacks her. Regardless, the police end up showing up and like, he's got like a weird squid arm at this point. He's clearly transforming into something. And, then he growls at them and like gets away. And then we get a fade to black and a 3 days later title card. And that's your end of Act 1. You guys know I love act breaks. It's a very clear, clean end of Act 1. So always fun. A good fade to black, then a title card. And then
it almost feels like the end of an episode in this.
Absolutely.
Like this could totally be like I could see this being a TV show called Slither.
Or at
end
least
of
a
the episode,
miniseries.
or a miniseries. And you come back where they are figuring out how to find this creature, and they know that he's going to these different fields and killing all the animals.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of questions at that point, which is why it would be a good like episode end where like where's Brenda? What's going on with Grant? Why does he look like that? Where has he gone? And that kind of stuff. And so, so the police and the mayor are kind of scrambling to try to find him because he's like killing animals at night. And we later learn that he's bringing these animals to Brenda to feed her. But so they deduce that he will be attacking this one family's farm on a night. So they like set up a stakeout, get a posse together and set up a stakeout. And I love the stakeout scene because it's got a lot of good like banter and jokes in it.
I thought you said squid.
I won't repeat most of them here because they're pretty dirty.
Yeah.
We try to keep this a clean podcast. But good stakeout scene. I do remember James Gunn saying that like during the stakeout scene when Nathan Fillion and Elizabeth Banks like recount a story from their childhoods where like she knocked on his window like wanting him to come with her, run away to Hollywood when they're like 14. Elizabeth Banks, like the lighting is kind of off, so like she looks like she's just like a floating head, and like her body's completely blacked out, and it's just her head floating. And like I would have never noticed that, but like once he pointed that out, it's all I can see in that scene. Yeah, I can't unsee it. And now like I pay attention to that kind of stuff. It's like, are there any floating heads? Is the lighting off? But apparently it was like raining or whatever when they shot that, so it was not ideal conditions. I think before the stakeout though. As they're leaving the police station, they plant Chekhov's grenade. We're familiar with Chekhov's gun? Yes?
Yeah. Yes.
The idea of Chekhov's gun is if you show a gun in the first act in a play or movie, that gun has to go off in the third act. Like everything has to matter and come back, every detail. And in this movie, about 35 minutes in, they point to a grenade that's in the police station, Chekhov's grenade, and that will go off or not later on, which is just fun. But
it's
so
also,
the stakeout
it's also
happens.
just really funny that this small town has this crazy arsenal of
grenade,
weapons.
yeah.
Like it's got grenades.
Not a crazy arsenal. They just have a single grenade.
One grenade.
Oh, like all the rifles that they have. They like one has it looks like a big grenade launcher, the sniper rifle, and then there's like an assault rifle, and it feels like that scene in Hot Fuzz where they find this guy who has this arsenal and just bring them into the station and they're just using them.
That would be surprising in England, but in southern United States, not really.
Okay, well, actually, to my virgin European eyes, I was like, Jesus Christ, these guys have a lot of guns.
Well, I also like they round up a posse. Like that feels very true to a small town, particularly in like in a rural area where like there's only like a few police officers, but also like everyone has guns. So let's round up a few people who got a lot of them and are willing to stake out a farm for a night and find this squid guy. And of course, Grant as the squid thing does show up and like kills a cow, and then he's so crazily deformed at this point. He's basically just a big slug with tentacles, and Michael Rooker's face still there. and again, this is not comfortable for Michael Rooker to be in, so shout out to him. And they surround him, and at this point, Starlet tries to appeal to him and reason with him, saying, just come with us, we'll get you better.
We'll get you better.
Marriage
right.
vows. I swore to, stick by you for better, for worse, and then someone says much fucking worse, which is great.
I think it was the mayor.
yeah. Or Nathan Fillion, I can't remember. And then a scene I really did not enjoy when I was in high school when I first saw this, Grant, slices a guy in half in a kind of a funny way. It's also kind of like a...
I thought it was so funny, because he's
Really?
He's getting cut in half, but he's still alive for a while, and you see him look at himself as he's getting split, and it's almost
as he comes apart.
Yeah, it's almost like one of those a samurai anime thing where he cuts in half, and there's a few seconds when nothing happens, and then the cut happens.
Except
the timing of it, I thought was
in the samurai and anime stuff. The guy gets cut in half, and then you see their silhouette split, and you never see the content spilling out.
Here you see everything,
and it is gross.
I think it's a really good effect as well.
I think it's interesting that you find comedy in that. I think that's cool, actually, because I always found that to be gross and horrific.
Same.
But I can also see how the timing of it and how slowly it happens. I can see how you could find humor in that as well. I'm sure James Gunn intended you to find humor.
It's a very specific kind of humor, I guess. It's for people who don't mind to see the violence, and it's played for comedy. And I feel like Tarantino movies do this sometimes, where it's incredibly violent, but it's also kind of funny.
Yeah, the end of Inglourious Bastards.
The end of Inglourious Bastards, or even the scene in Kill Bill where Oren cuts the head of the guy, and for a few seconds nothing happens, and then the blood just starts. It's so exaggerated that it is played in a way that is both comedic and horrific at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, Marvin getting shot in the face is kind of played off as kind of funny in Pulp Fiction too.
Good point.
I just shot Marvin in the face.
Yeah.
But even though it is kind of funny when this dude gets split in half, and so that is the escalation of Grant, being the police need to catch him, and at that point, Starla Elizabeth Banks does a classic horror movie scream in reaction to this murder, basically, and then he slithers away, and they chase after him. Grizz, what do you got?
I just wanted to point out that, again, we're in the South, and if you were in a posse, a hunting party, and you came upon a creature that looked like this, you wouldn't stop to talk with it.
Well, yeah, Starla kind of already breached that, though.
I know.
She was the one who,
I'm just
tried to, reason with it.
No, even if you had told me the plan is I'm going to go try to reason with him, the moment we see him, I'd be like, nope, fire away, guys. There's no saving him.
Well, also, this guy, the guy gets cut in half, I think it's very funny that he tries to, rough talk him. And act like a tough guy. We can make this easy, or we can make it hard. And then he gets split in half immediately. So then Grant, as the slug, slithers off into the woods, and he basically leads the posse to the barn where Brenda is. And also one of my least favorite things in this movie is Brenda in the barn. So she's a big fat person. She's literally the size of the barn. She's enormous. And when James Gunn came and talked to our high school, we had a little Q&A session with him, just our film class. And the question I got to ask him is, where did the image of Brenda in the barn come from? And he jokingly said, a bad date, I guess, which I thought was funny. But at the time,
Factory, I guess.
Well, when I saw Slither for the first time in this film class, I had seen trailers for Slither and TV spots and that kind of thing. And the only thing I really remembered from those was the image of Brenda in the barn, because that was I think the ending of the trailer was her that push in where she says something's wrong with me.
Yeah.
And seeing that, I'm I really don't want to see this movie at all. And
so
I didn't want to see it until I was forced to watch it for school. And so did not like that image, but that's the scene here. But there's a good comedic cut of the tension where Nathan Fillion says, so what's going on here? A good way to cut the tension.
And she's just I'm just so hungry. Could you pass me that possum over there, please?
And she says I know it's gross, but
Yeah, don't judge me.
I
That's what she
felt
says.
I felt so bad for her, which is you're
Yes.
supposed to. But it made me
And
very
then
uncomfortable.
she gets torn apart by the worms that are inside her, and the worms spread out everywhere. We later learn that these worms are all like extensions of the Grant entity, like all part of the same brain or whatever, and they crawl into people's mouths and make them zombies. And actually, that was the starting point of the movie. Actually, James Gunn, his initial idea, the kernel of the idea for this movie was he had an image in his head of someone on their knees with like a worm thing, creepily burrowing its way into their mouth, and like their eyes rolling into the back of their head, and like that single image was what he built the movie around. So basically, what happens in this scene to Wally and a few of the other deputies and a few other people, that's how the movie started. The kernel of the idea. And so at that point, anyone who had a worm go into their mouth is like out for the count for the time being. They eventually kind of like become zombies, but for now they're just kind of like laying there, still alive, but like unconscious. What do you got, Grizz?
I just had a question that maybe this came up in your discussion with James Gunn on this movie. Why was it that when the alien first infects Grant, it's with a needle being shot into his chest, and then all subsequent infections are via worms going into their mouth? Why didn't he do the worm to the mouth thing the first time?
Because
that did not come up.
It's like a hive mind thing. So that the first person, like, it sort of impregnates a person so it can impregnate all the other people, but it's not taking over each person individually in the same way. The original person is the central part, the brain of the hive mind. Yeah. And then once, he's impregnated this girl to create all these worms, the worms are just an extension. And I guess,
except they still
only
retain some of the knowledge of the people that the worms have infected, because the little girl, the young lady's family, they
I guess
talk
they
to
do,
her.
yeah.
So
I guess they do, but I feel like the main part is still the original, because like all of them are saying, "Oh, Brenda, Starla," all the time. Where are you? And that kind of stuff. So, I mean, it doesn't really matter. I feel like maybe it's just.
I just thought maybe there was a reason. No,
I just feel like maybe the only part of it that could survive in outer space after it had escaped this planet where it was this shell thing with the needle, and then it expands that way.
I thought maybe he had a reason for that mechanical change for the spread of
there might have been
aliens, but I will continue to be curious about that.
Well, I mean, like the Grant's encounter with the asteroid thing is like kind of like facehuggery from Alien.
Yeah, 100% is facehuggery.
So it's so it's kind of like pulling different. It's just a reason to use different horror tropes. And then like the worms like a little different, not really facehuggery, but it's like something else. But I don't know. Good question. But like even though he never like explains this, it kind of like Hugo and I. It makes sense to me that like he is like the first person gets the needle, so he's like the center of it all, and then like he just kind of expands out, and like the people who get the worms in their brains, like I guess their prerogative is either to feed themselves or to go to Grant and like get absorbed by him. And like as they kind of say, like eventually the entire planet will be absorbed by this one entity, and then he moves on to the next planet. And
it's also there's a difference between like the ones that he personally impregnates with the two sausage prongs are the ones that become that are going to make new worms, and the other people are just taken over, and they eventually go back to the queen bee or whatever and are joined into this massive gross blob. But I feel like one of the reasons
that's what the thing does in the thing, right? Is like it fuses people, right?
Exactly. Eventually, and I feel like one of the reasons is just that he wanted an escalation of grossness through the movie, like because the worm thing, which the film is called Slither, so you would and the image even in the poster is the worms in the bathtub. That's more than halfway through the movie. So I feel like the movie has a good escalation of it starts with this little needle thing, and then you get some scabs, and then you see the tentacles, and then you see Brenda, and then the worms. Like for some people, like the worms for me personally are more gross than the image of Brenda just being enormous. For me personally. So I think the movie does this really cool escalation of grossness, And if it started with the worms, it maybe would not have worked in the same way.
Yeah, like you just said, that the worms, Brenda explodes at the movie's midpoint, functionally speaking. Like I said, I love act breaks. End of Act 1 is when they first see Grant as Squid Arm, and they have the title card 3 days later. Midpoint of the movie, Brenda's worms, and then the end of Act 2 is probably when Starla gets taken away. Starla and the mayor get taken away out of the car. So I love a movie with clear act breaks. It's nice. So at this point, worms spread out over the whole town and like infect a lot of people, and then they wake up. Then like Wally wakes up, and like everyone who had a worm crawling to them is now a zombie, but clearly like Grant. That like they talk as if they are Grant. They talk to Starla as if they're Grant, and then she shoots Wally in the head with a shotgun, which also is like a kind of like timed in such a way that's kind of a joke, where he says he's just about to say you don't got the balls to do it, but like he doesn't even get the word balls out before she blows his head in half.
Yeah.
Very graphically, but kind of comedically. And then like there's another set piece where they're kind of trying to escape these zombies, Nathan Fillion and Elizabeth Banks, and this girl Kylie who's living. Her family is the farm where the stakeout took place. Like her whole family gets infected, but she gets away. She actually is important because she's kind of like the exposition, like explaining everything, because she has a worm going in her mouth, but only like halfway, and she like grabs it before it can go all the way in. So she like gets the knowledge of like what this alien is without actually becoming the alien herself, like everyone else who gets a worm in their
I thought
mouth,
that was a really clever plot device.
It's a good plot device, yeah. I mean, it's kind of like this whole movie's far-fetched. Like for some reason, that to me was like a little too far-fetched. I guess like it seemed a little convenient. I guess. I mean, it's clever,
sure,
to get exposition out, but like I don't know. So then again, so there's the set pieces of like there's the stakeout set piece, and then the Brenda Worm set piece, and then the Kylie and her family set piece, and then her family all infected are like banging on the door of on the windshield of the truck as she's hiding inside. Good creepy scene. And then basically Nathan Fillion and Elizabeth Banks, the mayor, and Kylie, this girl, escape the zombies in a final like set piece. So it's like 25 straight minutes of like set pieces.
And it was a lot.
And then
this is one of the weak spots for me in this movie. It's a lot of repetition because a lot of the same things are happening over and over again, just in different places.
Yeah. But this culminates with a couple funny moments where Elizabeth Banks like basically kills one of the deputy zombies by stabbing him in the throat with a big fence post, basically. And Greg Henry gives a great line read of "Bitch is hardcore," which I always gotta laugh in my film class and every screening I've been to. And then I mentioned earlier we have the aforementioned car scene where there's like a lot of jokes cutting the tension about Mr. Pibb and the septic tank at Nathan Fillion's mom's house, and the what actually is a Martian, whether that means for Mars or just a general outer space person. But again, this is also where we get the exposition where Kylie kind of tells everybody what she learned when the worm went in her mouth and like what's happening here, and that this entity is going to destroy the entire world and then move on to the next planet. Then they get Jenna Fisher makes a cameo, I guess I should mention. Jenna Fisher, who was at the time married to James Gunn. I think they had someone else in line to play the secretary at the police station, and that actress had to drop out for some reason. And so at the last minute, he was able to cast his wife, Jenna Fisher, who was like very thrilled. Apparently she'd always wanted to be in a horror movie and like was like super excited to be able to do it. And I remember hearing that she was super excited to do a horror movie Scream. Because at one point, like, she looks up and there are worms coming out of the ceiling, and like there's a shot looking down at Jenna Fisher, and she does get to do a nice horror movie Scream. And then she becomes a zombie. But there's a car crash because like all the worms are connected, so they know exactly where the car full of Nathan Fillion and Elizabeth Banks are. So like, they basically crash into them, take the mayor away, take Starla away. That's kind of your end of Act 2, I guess. Yeah. And then like Act 3 is basically Nathan Fillion and Kylie trying to rescue Starla and also kill Grant to kill all the worms.
And at this point, the mayor gets impregnated. He becomes one of the ones that's hungry, and we get this basement scene that is equally gross and hilarious to me, where the woman is like, "Oh, don't judge me. Do you not understand how it means to be hungry? We'll run away all the Republicans from the state. You damn Republicans!"
I never caught that. I've seen this movie probably half a dozen times. I've never caught that line, and I watched it with subtitles on because that's what I do now because I can't hear. And like, it's only because of subtitles I finally like heard that joke, which that was really funny.
That was a great joke. Yeah.
Yeah. And then later, Greg Henry being very hungry, like begrudgingly eats like a person's arm as again every woman in the world plays, which that was really funny. Just that song playing as he does it is great. Yeah. But also here we have the return of Chekhov's grenade, because Nathan Fillion and Kylie, their plan to beat Grant is to go into the police station, get that grenade that's in there, because we know it's in there because we saw it an hour earlier. He gets attacked by a deer, gets the grenade, Kylie saves him, blah, 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 blah. They go to Grant's house, where Starla is being held captive, I guess, as slave Leia, basically.
Yeah, and just to point out, they dressed her in a white dress. That's
yes, they did.
More horror movie symbolism stuff, the purity of Starla and all that.
Yes. And we see all the wormed zombie people like get naked and like get absorbed by Grant. That's also really gross. Like, really gross part at all. It's gnarly.
Yeah, and then it cuts to Nathan Fillion after we've seen the thing, and he's like, "Well, now that's some fucked up shit."
Yep. another great tension cutting line. And then just like a final set piece where they just like defeat him, where Grant gets like first of all, Starla tries to like
stab him,
appeal to him, get on his good side, and it's all a ruse because she tries to stab him as she gets close to him. Doesn't work, and then Nathan Fillion tries to hit him with a grenade, and the grenade gets knocked out of his hand twice, and then it rolls into the pool, and then again, one of my favorite reaction shots is the grenade just blows up in the pool, and then just Nathan Fillion's completely blank face at the grenade going off. It's so funny to me. Always has been, always will be. And then Grant puts one worm tentacle into Nathan Fillion, but he can't get the second one in. Nathan Fillion puts the second one into a propane tank, which I never thought of this till this most recent rewatch. The tentacles are pushing worms into someone, so they're pumping, and then suddenly he puts in the propane tank, and then suddenly it's sucking.
So
it was pumping a second ago.
The pressure of the propane going out of the tank pushes back, I guess.
Okay, so I thought it also could have been. I justified the reason for the two tentacles being that one is planting worms and the other is removing innards to make room for the worms.
Ah, good call. Okay, yeah.
That's so gross.
Either way, gross, but that's a good mechanical explanation for how this propane thing worked. But yeah, so basically, Grant Squid starts sucking up propane into himself, and then Nathan Fillion says to Starla, "Shoot him," and there's a brief moment where she hesitates, and I don't know if you guys have seen The Fly, David Cronenberg's The Fly, but this moment is very reminiscent of that. And then Starla shoots Grant, he explodes, everyone who had a worm in their head just falls down dead, and Nathan Fillion's okay, Kylie's okay, Starla's okay, and that's kind of it, just the three of them. Oh, great moment with the mayor. The mayor, as he's like transforming because he got all wormy, he goes up to Bill Party, Nathan Fillion, and says, "Please kill me, Party," and without even hesitating for a second,
he shoots him.
Nathan Fillion just shoots him in the head. I like that moment.
I thought that was one of the moments I thought was really funny as well.
Yeah. Also good. Again, that's like in the midst of like the final boss set piece. So again, like a good way to cut the tension of that scene. It's just a nice little laugh there. That's basically the movie. Then Starla and Nathan Fillion and Kylie walk out. I love the moment where they walk out of the house and there's just like dead bodies everywhere. It's just like a cool shot as the sun's coming out.
And Nathan Fillion's like, tell Starla about that time I saved you from a dead deer.
Yeah, you saved me. From a deer.
Movie ends.
Then the movie ends. The credits roll. A funny song plays as they walk off to the next town. The lyrics of the song that plays with the credits is "Darling, I love you, but leave me the fuck alone," or whatever the words are. It's funny. I don't know. I like it. And yeah, that's Slither. Nice little fun horror comedy, I guess, or maybe just a horror movie that's fun. Yeah, depending on who you ask, I guess.
Bit of both.
What did you guys think? I didn't even ask you up front. What you thought? Again, I saw your letterboxd reviews, but repeat them here, I guess. Grizz, what'd you think of Slither?
So I enjoyed the movie overall. Like, ended up giving it 3 out of 5 stars. So I had a positive experience with it, but it wasn't revolutionary to me. I didn't think it was funny enough to really be a horror comedy. But as we've established from like the ones that are my favorites, I clearly skew towards the comedy side of horror comedy. So
Right.
of course,
Yes.
it's not going to resonate with me quite as well as it might a horror fan. But
Yeah.
you know, I'm happy to have seen it because like it does have a bit of a cult following. So you know, thank you for suggesting it, Josh.
Of course. Hugo?
For me, this is the definition of one of those movies that when I think about it critically, is like, oh, this is clearly like a very much a 6.5, 7 out of 10 movie. But I had tons of fun watching it. I really like how it plays with the classic, you know, it plays with Invasion of the Body Snatchers and zombie movies and, you know, The Thing and David Cronenberg movies for the body horror stuff. And while at the same time having this really just fun ride kind of feel, like it was fun. Like I had fun even in the gross moments. I had fun even when it wasn't supposed to be funny. I just thought it was a pleasant experience. I love the wit of it. I think the writing, you can tell James Gunn would go on to write some of the funnier Marvel movies because he really gets how to write witty characters who don't all feel the same. Because sometimes with really witty movies, you get this where all of the characters speak the same. And I feel like with his movies, all the characters are very distinct and funny in different ways, and they're witty in their own way, which I really appreciate. So overall, I really liked it. I thought it was. I guess I have a morbid sense of humor, but I thought a lot of the grossest scenes had comedic timing to them. And so they you know, there's always this thing where comedy and horror are about building up tension and breaking that tension, and so you can have something that's really horrific and really funny at the same time, and it's no coincidence that a lot of comedy people also work in horror. Like, you know, Jordan Peele is a good example from recently. So yeah, it really worked for me. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I think that part of, I mean, obviously I have like a vague personal connection to James Gunn, so I'm kind of be predisposed to like his movies, I guess. But I think also like Grizz, you and I shared the fact that we not really horror movie fans, right. And I particularly was not when I was 17 when I first saw this. Like I avoided them adamantly when I was 17, and so like the fact that I kind of like was forced to watch this like literally for school, I think I kind of like hold it more dear for that reason. It's like one of the first movies where it was a horror movie out of my comfort zone, but I watched it and like really, really enjoyed it. And like, oh, this is like a good learning experience for me that like maybe there are things to like in these movies, and they're also not as scary as I think they are in my head, you know, that kind of thing. Because I think this was kind of, I do remember the marketing for it, and I don't think they really highlighted the comedy. They really made it, they sold it as like a gross out horror alien
and that may be
thing.
Because we were talking about like the Saw movies and Hostel and all those, all that, you know, really gross gore in horror movies. Maybe that's why they decided to market it that way, and it possibly did it a disservice by doing that.
I mean, it really turned me off. It turned me off to it, and I like I said earlier, I had no desire to see it at all, just because of the image of Brenda in the barn in the trailer. But I'm really glad that I did, because I agree with Hugo. I think it's really, really fun, and I don't know, just like I want more movies like this, you know, like horror movies that you can watch around Halloween or whatever, but like still have like a really good time, you know. Have some drinks with some friends and put this on. Like, I think this is really solid. And Grizz, I also agree with you. It's not revolutionary. There's nothing about this that's like particularly special. And like, honestly, like, I can't decide if a movie like this would be more likely to be made now or less likely. I feel like less likely because, you know, it doesn't have any kind of real hook. It's just like a fun throwback to old horror movies. A fun throwback to B movies.
I think this is the sort of thing that'll go in cycles, that occasionally you'll get the opportunity to make another throwback movie. But now that this throwback movie is made, now you got to wait a few more years before the next throwback movie gets to be made, because otherwise, you know, it's not a throwback anymore.
And it's not like a throwback. It's not like a throwback in the Stranger Things kind of sense. It's I don't really know what to compare it to now.
Throwback in the sense of like the way B movie horror was made and the kind of stories they told. It's a throwback in that sense, because obviously it was set in the time that it was being shot.
Yeah. I mean, it comes off as a movie made by, like, I wouldn't really call it particularly scary personally or horrific, but it's like a movie made by someone who grew up on and loves horror movies. And just basically like sending up everything they grew up on and loved, but making it their own, which is like a funny, irreverent, you know, gross kind of thing. I think it all works, and I really enjoy it.
I feel like what this movie does that the other movies of this time didn't is it has a lot of gore and grossness, which the Saw movies, Hostel, those types of movies also have. But the reason why I like this and I don't like those is this is it's very self-aware about it, and those movies play it straight. And when you play it straight, I just don't find it interesting. I like when a movie knows what it's playing with, and I think it's really clever at that.
The Saw movies, at least the ones I've seen, are pretty mirthless. They're not
they're just
winking at all. They're just pretty dour, I guess is the word I'm looking for.
Yeah.
So
just unpleasant.
This cuts tension with comedy.
Yeah.
Shall we rank it?
Let's rank
it. Before rank. So even though I really enjoy this, I think we all enjoy this on some level. I'm not going to rank this very high because, like, you know, I think that kind of speaks to how good the movies are on our list. Like, I'm glad we're kind of like throwing in some obscure B horror movies from the 2000s because, like, it's good to mix it up. But looking at our list, I mean, I don't even know if I should bother saying the top 10 because it's not going to be in the top 10.
No.
It's not going to be in the top 20. Should I just list from number 20 to number 32?
Sure.
I'll do that. Yeah. So from 20 to 32, we have at number 20, Rudy, 127 Hours, Batman Mask of the Phantasm, Another Round, Mank, Trial of Chicago 7, Matrix Reloaded, Space Jam, Iron Man 3, Sugarland Express, Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, The Godfather Part 3 / Coda, whatever. And then at number 32, we have Perfect Blue. Grizz, where are you putting Slither?
So I'm putting it at the bottom of the list for me.
All right.
Again, that's not a statement to say that I dislike the movie. Like I said, I did enjoy it overall. But I've just looking at the list, I'm like, you know what? I would rather watch all of these movies again before I'd watch this.
Totally fair. Yeah. Hugo, how about you?
For me, I had a lot of fun with this. I would put it a little higher. For me personally, I would put it below Another Round, which might be the most underrated movie on the list for me personally. But yeah, I think below Another Round, above Mank is where more or less I would put it.
Well, for me, Mank is by far the most underrated movie on the list, which is sitting there at 24. I was looking at. I definitely want to put it below Trial of Chicago 7. I was trying to debate whether
which for me is the most underrated movie on our list.
Sure, yeah, that makes sense. Well, at least I'm putting it below Trial of Chicago 7. Like, I'm saying Trial of Chicago 7 is better. But I was debating whether to put it above or below Matrix Reloaded, Space Jam, and Iron Man 3. And I'm going to put it above all three of those. So I'm going to put it just below Trial of Chicago 7, above Matrix Reloaded. Partially for nostalgia factor for me. Sure. But I really enjoy this. This is a fun movie, and I like showing it to people. So I'm glad you guys would humored me this week and we're game to watch it.
So where does that average out to?
So Hugo put it at 24, I put it at 26, and Grizz put it at 33. Based on our secret proprietary algorithm, I believe that maths out to number 28. So we're going to put it number 28 just behind Space Jam, just ahead of Iron Man 3. So James Gunn's Slither goes 28 on the Film Term list.
There you go.
Next week, we aren't having an episode. Is that right?
That is correct.
We aren't having an episode for the next 2 weeks, actually, because we're all
people
going on holiday at the same time.
Yeah. Yes. Shout out to Matt Hawk, whose wedding I'm attending, or like reception party thing I'm attending in Austin, Texas next weekend.
Oh, nice.
Shout out to my cousin Kara, whose wedding I'm attending in Georgia.
and shout out to me, because I'm going on holiday for a week. I don't know.
Going on holiday.
I'm actually going. Have you seen the movie Luca? By Pixar, just released. I'm going there.
Very nice.
I'm literally going there. I'm going to send you.
If you're into fish people, let me know.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Also, shout out to my friend Blair, who is getting married in the fall, and I am attending his bachelor party at Yosemite in 2 weeks, and that's where
busy.
2 weeks.
Look at us with having friends.
Yeah, how about us?
So
hey,
we'll
look at us.
Back.
Who would have thought?
Not me.
So we'll be back in a couple weeks.
In 3 weeks, I guess.
In 3 weeks, Hugo, what will we be watching?
I've been wanting to talk about David Lynch for a while, and I feel like there's 2 ways of talking about David Lynch. You either pick something very normal by him and highlight how it's a contrast from his usual thing, but I went the other route, and we're going to pick something very, very weird. We're going to watch Mulholland Drive, which is one of my favorite movies. very
Mine too.
weird, creepy psychological horror movie with lots to talk about. Psychological horror thriller. You can call it many things. I said horror, but I feel like I would say thriller.
I'm going to push back a little bit and say that Mulholland Drive is actually one of his more straightforward pieces.
Well, we're definitely going to talk about this then.
On the scale of David Lynch.
Okay.
Like, it's actually pretty straightforward.
Mulholland Drive becomes more and more straightforward as you watch it more. But on the first watch...
Yeah, that makes sense. Yes.
As a first watch, it's very David Lynch, very confusing, very weird. Fair. So we'll have a variety of experiences. We've seen it a bunch of times. This will be my
first time seeing it.
Grizz is the first time. I also don't know what you've seen by David Lynch, but we'll talk about it in 3 weeks. So, yeah. Look out for that.
So, join us again in 3 weeks.
Bye, everyone.
Then. Bye,
Bye.
peeps.